What's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. On today's episode, we're going to build a gaming PC. For quite a while, my brother's been talking about buying a PS5, but due to the supply issues, they just really haven't been available unless you're going to buy one off eBay or Marketplace for some astronomical amount off of a scalper. Rather than dealing with that, he played a couple games on my PC, which I bought when I started this YouTube channel to do content creation, video editing, photo editing, stuff like that. It obviously does play games also very well because it's a pretty powerful PC, and he loved it. Sadly, when I bought mine, I had to buy it complete, but this time around, he actually got to go to Microcenter and pick out everything that he wanted in the colors that he wanted and brands that he wanted. Big shout out to him because he was nice enough to let me film the whole thing and patient enough to put up with me trying to film some of these clips, and I think it turned out pretty sick. So without further delay, let's get into it. Oh, one more thing. If you think I deserve it and you like the video, please remember to like and subscribe. Really helps out the channel, and I appreciate every single subscription and like. And remember to ring that bell notification so you get notified when a new video comes out.
So at the start of this build, my brother had two requests. As many white components as possible and maximum performance. Within reason, of course. He decided to go with the Lian Li Cool 2 mesh. And from my research, this seems to be a pretty popular case and a reputable, well-made brand. With the case out of the box, it was time to get into the motherboard and CPU. After talking to the rep at Microcenter, he decided to go with an Asus ROG Strix X570E motherboard and a Ryzen 7 5800X. Being that this computer would be primarily used for gaming, he opted to stay away from the Ryzen 9, which helped keep costs lower without sacrificing much performance. Referencing a few YouTube videos, because how else would you learn? We installed the CPU onto the motherboard, being careful to align the arrows per the directions, and clip down the lever to lock it in place. We opened up the AAO cooler next, but in an effort to ease the installation of the motherboard later, we opted to install the 1TB M.2 NVMe instead. We decided to go with the Samsung 980 Pro Evo, which seems to be one of the go-to SSDs. This type of SSD, compared to a standard SATA SSD, is roughly 3 times faster, allowing programs and games to boot up much faster and run smoother. With the SSD secured to the motherboard, we reinstalled the heatsink, remembering to remove the sticker backing. Finishing off the remaining motherboard components, we installed 32 GB of Corsair 3200 MHz CL16 RAM. Be careful to check your motherboard specs and markings before installing to ensure they are placed in the proper DIMM slots. This is only applicable if you're only installing 2 RAM sticks. With the motherboard items wrapped up, we moved on to installing items in the case. To start this process off, we installed the power supply. We were given the option of a smaller 750 watt power supply, but because Zach really wanted the ability to upgrade components later, we went with the Corsair RM1000X, which is a 1000 watt model. Next up, we placed the motherboard in the case and secured it in place with screws. Sadly, for whatever reason, nor the case or the motherboard came with these screws, so we had to make a trip to our local hardware store to get them. With the motherboard secured, we jumped back to working on the cooler. For this application, we went with an AIO liquid cooler from Lian Li as well. This is the 240mm Galahad model. Excuse me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. We started with installing the provided 120mm fans to the radiator and ensuring the direction was correct, given we wanted the air to be pushed out the top of the case. With the fans mounted, we moved to installing the radiator at the top of the case, using the provided screws. We then swapped out the Intel bracket on the back of the pump to the required AMD version. After we laid the case down, we decided to test fit the AIO pump on the CPU to make it easier to install once thermal paste was applied. Then we applied the required amount of thermal paste to the face of the CPU, which is roughly the size of a pea. This paste is required as it acts as an interface to allow heat to transfer from the CPU into the water block on the back of the AIO pump. Now for the really expensive part, the graphics card. Not gonna lie, we were pretty nervous about this part due to the significant cost.
Sick.
We removed the necessary drive tray covers in the back of the case and then proceeded to align the EVGA RTX 3080 12GB GPU into the associated slot. With a firm push, it clipped in without any issue, and we secured it to the back of the case with the necessary thumb screws. For those of you who are unfamiliar with these cards, they are still extremely hard to get. Luckily, we were able to get our hands on a good one. With all the components assembled and installed in the case, it was time to start the tedious task of hooking up all the cabling. This was honestly the most time-consuming process of the build, and if I was going to give one piece of advice, I probably would have hooked up the power cables to the power supply prior to installing it in the case to make access a little easier. Prior to securing all the cables we just installed,
Did the lights go on?
Yeah.
we wanted to confirm the PC worked, as this was the first time we've ever done anything like this. To our surprise, it booted up without issue. We ended up missing the connection for the front case fans, but we quickly corrected that. With the PC up and running, I downloaded the media creation tool from the Microsoft website and made a flash drive to install Windows. The last task was to clean up all the wiring that we previously neglected and downloaded the necessary drivers and software, which was pretty straightforward. With all the hard work done, it was time to test it out. In the future, my brother plans to get a small desk and a gaming monitor because the TV doesn't support a high enough frame rate, but for now, it can play silky smooth games in 4K without any issue.
Well guys, that concludes today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I really did. It was a lot of fun to do this project with my brother. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.